And let's see, I think we are underway. So everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar session. My name is Christopher Lowe, and I'm joined with my colleagues, Dr. Ruth Wageman and Pauline Willis. And we're really excited to have you joining us for today's webinar session on the Team Diagnostics Survey, the 6 conditions of team effectiveness. This is going to be both a webinar. We're going to really share a bit of information about the Team Diagnostics Survey, about the instrument and what's going on with that. And this is also serving as a launch. So we're formally launching the survey. The survey's been around for a while, but it's mainly been being used in research settings and now really starting to bring it online in a more commercial and public way. So we're excited to today be formally announcing that in this session. But joining us again, our featured guest today, we have Dr. Ruth Wageman, a leading scholar and thinker in the areas of teams. And so her work, along with her colleagues, Dr. Richard Hackman, Aaron Lehman, and others at Harvard, I think is really some of the best-in-class work on really understanding teams, teaming, and how we can make a world a better place and a more productive place through building great teams. And Ruth, along with Richard Hackman, really seminal in terms of their publications, articles, books on teams and team coaching. So there's a whole laundry list of those. We're going to share those at the end. I think Ruth is really well known for her 2008 book, Senior Leadership Teams, What It Takes to Make Them Great, but lots of other great articles and books to share, and we'll provide that at the end. So everybody, welcome again to today's session. I'm going to pass it over to Ruth to kick it off, and we can get underway. We're going to invite you guys, though, to use the chat window liberally during the sessions, ask questions. My colleague Pauline and I will be channeling that and seeing what's going on there and teeing up questions for Ruth. She'll be taking some breaks along the way. And we have some moments at the end of the session today where you can have some Q&A, and if you want to get on the mic and get your voice in here, we can do that as well. So Ruth, why don't you take us away?
I'm glad to. Thank you, Krista. Thanks for that great introduction. And thank you everybody for joining this conversation today. I am really excited to share with you the new, improved, and the now widely available Team Diagnostics Survey. I also just want to start by saying that this is a partnership. I've been part of a group, Team Diagnostics, with Richard Hackman for some years now, that we created for the purpose of launching and testing the Team Diagnostics Survey, of making it widely available to scholars who care about understanding teams, teachers who are trying to develop the practice of teamwork in their classrooms. And Pauline Willis is here with us today. She is also a long-term part of our partnership from Laureate Consulting in the UK, and joining this partnership as well is Krista and the Team Coaching Zone. And so we're really excited and delighted to have you here, and really particularly delighted to share with you what it is that we have created. What I'm intending to do, there we go, in the course of the next 40 minutes or so, is to really start by talking about the 6 conditions framework that underpins the Team Diagnostic Survey, our research, and all of the work that we do with teams. This really is the framework that comes out of the 40 plus years of research and scholarship by Richard Hackman, by me at Harvard, and many of our other colleagues that we have built. And that is really about saying, what are the positive conditions that most powerfully lead to having teams that accomplish great things. And then the second thing I'll do is to talk about the implications of that basic framework for what it means for those of us who care about influencing the effectiveness of teams. So for those of us who lead teams, who coach teams, who consult to them, who operate in teams, I'm sure those of you who are here today can talk about many other perspectives from which you influence or care about the effectiveness of teams. What does that framework have to say about how we can go about doing that work of shaping team effectiveness most powerfully? And I'm going to illustrate that through something that we've come to call the 60-30-10 rule. At that point, I'll then introduce you a little bit about the Team Diagnostics Survey, what it is, what's in it, how it works, and the like. We'll talk about a couple of illustrations of how the Team Diagnostic Survey and its underlying framework has been used, is in use now, to actually drive team effectiveness, team mindset, and especially to deal with some of the most challenging modern issues around teams and teaming for those of us who care about it. And then finally, we'll wrap up and talk with you about what opportunities we've created for training in the Team Diagnostic survey and certification, and just for deeper learning about the framework and the way that we go about thinking and working with teams. I do promise that I will take a pause periodically and check in with Krista and Pauline, who are monitoring the chat, and see what's on your mind and what questions you'd like to raise and talk about in the course of our conversation today. Well, let me start with this, this model, the 6 conditions for team effectiveness. Over the last, I'm not sure I really want to count how many decades cumulatively, but over the last bunch of decades, as I'd said, Richard Hackman and I and our colleagues and many others at Harvard and other places have really been focusing on this main question, which is, what are the handful of conditions that you can actually design, install, deliberately put in place that collectively stack the deck so that teams will be able to chart their own courses to accomplish great things. And so these conditions are not things that are merely correlated with team effectiveness. There are lots of things that are correlated with the ultimate performance of teams. These are actually positive conditions that you can actively put in place and design them in order to increase the chances of having great teams. So what we've done is we've identified 6 conditions over the course of this research, and we divide them into what we call the 3 essentials. We call them the essentials because if you can't get these basically well-designed, you're better off trying to figure out how to get the work done without using a team. So the essentials that really need to be in place. And secondly, 3 additional conditions that we call the enablers. These are things that accelerate the development of a team into a really superb performing unit. And you'll get the picture, those of you who have worked for so many years with leading and working with teams. I think you'll get the basic picture of what we're after pretty quickly. But let me just go through each of these. First and foremost, I know it's going to sound very simple, but if you want to have a great team, you really actually have to have a real team. Many of the obstacles that we see to great teamwork in organizations is that we're expecting teamwork out of something that isn't really a team at all. It's not bounded, it's not clear who is and who isn't a member of the team, or we aren't together, it's not stable, the membership is not together long enough to really learn how to work together effectively as a team, and we're not genuinely interdependent for the things that we need to accomplish. We don't need to exchange information and resources and work together in order to accomplish our main purposes. The positive condition number 1 is, if you want great teamwork, create a real team, bounded, stable, interdependent for a common purpose. Second of the essentials is, so what actually is that purpose, and is it genuinely compelling? Does the team have some sense of clarity about where they're going and what success would look like if they were to accomplish it? Is that purpose meaningful? Does it have consequences for the lives and work of others? And is it challenging? Will it actually require the best of our capabilities in order to accomplish it? So a real team with a compelling purpose, and finally, the right people. Who are the people who actually can contribute to that purpose, both in terms of their basic competencies and skills for the work itself, but also their ability to work together effectively in teams. So there you have it, the essentials, the sturdy platform that you can put in place to increase the chances of having a great team. Then we have the 3 essentials, starting with sound structure. Every team needs a certain amount of structure. They need tasks that make sense to be done by a team and that allow them the initiative and judgment to actually do their work together. They need to be of a reasonable size. They need to have a handful of core norms of conduct, explicit rules about what to do and what not to do in the way that we work together as a team. Secondly, the team needs to operate in what we call a supportive organizational context. There are certain structures and systems in an organization that can either contribute to or detract from the likelihood that we'll actually be able to work together effectively as a team. So to illustrate, many organizations don't provide a supportive context by over-focusing their reward system on competitive or on individualistic rewards, rather than providing positive consequences for great team performance through more collective, collaborative reward systems. So a supportive organizational context in which the structures and systems are designed to promote rather than create obstacles for teamwork. And then finally, last in chronological order is what we call team coaching. What we mean in our model by team coaching is the hands-on, real-time direct intervention in the process that team members use to get their work done in order to help team members really make the best use of their collective resources. The last element that we frequently add to this model is, you'll see in the middle the term team leadership. And I want to underscore here that word isn't team leader. So we are not only talking about teams that have a formally designated leader. What we mean to imply by the team leadership presence in that model right there is that the most powerful acts of team leadership that we as coaches or that team leaders or that team members can make is to get each of these 6 conditions in place for a team and then keep them in place for the life of a group. That's it. That's the core underlying framework. That's the model that we have been building as in the course of all of our research and practice work with teams. I want to talk a little bit about the implications of this conditions thinking for what I think is the really critical question that brings us together here today as a group, and that is, so how can you actually influence team effectiveness and increase the chances that teams really become superb performing units? One of the things I'd like to underscore about this conditions thinking or this model is that a great deal of research and scholarship, many of the assessments and interventions that are out there around teams really focus quite heavily on team processes, but on team behavior, team dynamics, how members of the team are interacting in the course of trying to get the work done together. Our model is focusing on these conditions because it's the conditions that actually drive the processes that we see emerge in teams, and those processes that ultimately influence what we mean by team effectiveness, which is performance, how well the team meets the needs of its clients. Is it getting better as a performing unit over time? Are members growing as a consequence of their work together? Now, I don't want to suggest that this emphasis on conditions means that we don't think that processes are important. Of course, if you see in the interactions of a team that members are disengaged or not putting in a lot of commitment and effort into the work, or we see in their interactions that only certain people's perspectives or skills are really being used in the way that the work gets done, or if we're seeing a team where they can't seem to actually coordinate or accomplish the strategies they've established for themselves, those processes are diagnostically useful. They tell us something in the short run about the likelihood that a team is going to be effective in the long run. However, they're not, in our view, the primary point of intervention. The primary point of intervention, if you really want to make a difference in team effectiveness, is in creating, shoring up, designing those conditions brilliantly so that the processes that emerge are on a very positive trajectory that lead to great team effectiveness over time. So I just want to illustrate the implications of this way of thinking about influencing team effectiveness through what Richard and I came to call the 60-30-10 rule for teams. And this is really a heuristic way of thinking about how you can have the most powerful impact on team effectiveness, really where your energy should go if what you care about is influencing team effectiveness. The thing that has the most impact, the 60%, is what we'll call pre-work. So 60% of the most important things that you can do to influence the effectiveness of a team happen before the team even exists. This is the conceptual or design work in thinking about, what is it I'm trying to accomplish? Do I really need a team to do it? If so, how would I articulate a really compelling purpose to the team members that conveys with clarity the consequences of what it is that they're going to be doing? Who are the people that could actually contribute to that purpose, and how am I going to get them to the table? What are the basic norms or rules of engagement that I think would get this team off to a good start? What kind of resources are they going to need in order to be effective as a team? 60% of the most important work you can do happens before the team even exists. 30% of the impact is in breathing life into those conditions in the first few minutes in the life of a group. So the next 30%, the second most impact, is in really launching the team brilliantly and bringing those conditions to life when you convene the team and articulate the purpose and begin engaging with the work and developing those norms of conduct and helping the team to reflect on and make use of the resources that have been provided to them. 10% is the real-time, hands-on coaching intervention in the processes by which team members are actually getting their work done together. Now, I realize that this is a pretty powerful statement. It's a pretty strong statement about how you can go about having impact on team effectiveness. And it really, I think, has a bottom line implication, which is pay exquisite attention to the beginnings in the life of a group. Which raises, I think, some interesting questions for those of us who are invited in to help teams well along into their lives, and we can talk about those implications in a little while. But I wanted to pause for a moment to see if there are questions and reflections coming from the group.
Yeah, exactly. So Ruth, I'm just going to field one for you here to send to you. It's by Andy, who a little while ago asked, have you found any variation in these conditions, the 6 conditions, based on the organizational level of the team, either different conditions or differing levels of importance?
What I will say is I don't think that there is consistent evidence about different levels of importance. Collectively, what you're trying to do is stack the deck, and there are really powerful interaction effects among each of these different characteristics. So I don't think that we have seen that that for certain kinds of teams, purpose is more important than composition. These are all actually important for all teams. What we have seen is very systematic differences in the challenges that different kinds of teams face, including based on their level in the organization. So to give an illustration that commonly comes up in my work around leadership teams, we know that a compelling purpose matters a great deal for any kind of team. When we work with frontline teams and organizations, our research and assessments have shown that the most common threat to having a compelling purpose for frontline teams is their work may not be very consequential. It's not very impactful on the lives and work of others. It may not have tremendous strategic impact on the overall mission of the organization. By contrast, the real threat to compelling purpose in a leadership team is those purposes very often aren't particularly clear. It is a challenging conceptual task to identify what is the unique added value of a leadership team to the leadership of an organization over and above what each of the individual leaders contribute. And so in our research findings, and as a consequence in a lot of the intervention work that we do, that becomes a really critical focus in how we improve the effectiveness of leadership teams.
Great. So there's a couple of other questions in here, Ruth, about one wonders about relaunching a team or reinitializing the team. That's one question. And a second one is around further reading on the scientific foundations of the 60-30-10 rule. And I'm thinking about the paper you wrote, Ruth, where you show some really great graphs of teams that are poorly designed, how team coaching doesn't really do much. But when teams are well designed in these conditions, then team coaching really acts as an accelerant. But anyways, 2 questions there to field. So I don't know which one you want to tackle.
All right. So on the research literature underlying the 60-30-10 rule, I can direct your attention to a few things. One is an article that I wrote that's called Critical Success Factors for Self-Managing Teams, which I think is the first publication of the effect that you're talking about, Krister. And just to give you a quick summary of what I found there, this was actually an unexpected finding, which is always a wonderful thing in doing research when your data surprise you, when what teams do really surprise you. I was pretty convinced of the power of team coaching as an influence on team effectiveness, and actually what I found was that when teams had unclear purposes or the wrong members or few norms of conduct or were not rewarded as teams, so the basic design conditions were not in place for those teams, they were not at all helped by good coaching, no matter how good it was. It really did not make a difference in their performance effectiveness or their ability to self-manage to have somebody in there working the process of the team. And by contrast, the teams that were well designed, that had clear purposes, great membership, norms of conduct, rewards, and the like, were well able to take advantage of really good coaching. And even better, they were quite robust. So if they were well designed and their coach was rather ineffectual, they weren't undermined by ineffective coaching. So that's in critical success factors. There's a version of that the more academic version was published in Organization Science, but I also wrote a practitioner piece that was published in Organization Dynamics, and those will be available to you. We'll make those links available to you on the website. Richard Hackman also published a book in the last year of his life called Collective Intelligence, and the 60-30-10 rule is also articulated in that. Collaborative intelligence, that's articulated in the last chapter of that book. Okay, Krister, take me back. What was the?
So it's just around. There was somebody posed a question, Rylan, here. What one wonders about relaunching a team. So what's a lot of times we come to teams that are already pre-existing. You don't have the nicety to really do this great design up front. So what about relaunching teams?
I have found that idea, the term relaunch, I like the term reinitializing as well. I think that would resonate a lot in more scientific settings. The notion of a relaunch has actually been kind of a relief to a lot of the leaders and team members that we've worked with, because most of the time when a team isn't working well, people know it. And so the idea of pushing the pause button and saying, we're actually going to consider ourselves disbanded, and I'm going to go back and do the pre-work effectively, or we're going to do it effectively, and get the team off to a really positive restart. It is actually a very powerful intervention for teams, and has been really helpful as a way of bringing the 60-30-10 rule to life.
One other quick question maybe here, Ruth, before you move on, and we can field some of these towards the end as well, is around psychological safety. Is that one of the conditions?
Mm-hmm. For those of you who are not familiar with this idea, psychological safety is a characteristic of how teams work together that involves making it possible for team members to take personal and professional risks, to experiment with different ways of operating, to be innovative, to make mistakes and acknowledge those mistakes. And that kind of psychological safety turns out to be extremely important for team learning. It also turns out to be extremely important for teams whose fundamental purpose is to innovate, to be creative and create novel things. Team psychological safety, therefore, is a really important sort of normative or cultural frame to have within a group, particularly in those kinds of contexts. And if you look at the work of Amy Edmondson, who originated this idea, what you'll see really deeply embedded in the work is how important the design conditions are for a culture of psychological safety to emerge. So having that really compelling and consequential purpose, and competent team members, and being a real team, and then also having a leader who intervenes to make it normative and acceptable, to admit to errors, to deal with errors, and to take risks. Those things are quite intimately related in her work and where she has studied psychological safety in organizational settings.
Cool. There's one comment here by Rob Costello, who says, as an agile coach, one of the biggest issues I see is team design and the lack of the 6 conditions. So that's something that some folks are echoing on. Maybe one more quick one. Andrea said that where do other concepts for team effectiveness show up in your model? Things like freedom and autonomy, self-awareness, meaning like emotional intelligence, connection between members, psychological safety, which you already addressed, and those type of topics.
Mm-hmm. They're located in different places depending on the terms that we're talking about in that list. The full model that, and you'll see this in a moment when I show you what's in the Team Diagnostics survey, we really pay our intervention and assessment focus. We really put a lot of attention onto the 6 conditions, because those are the places where you can design or redesign in order to affect these other processes and outcomes. For us, when we define what is an effective team, and through all the years of research that we've done, asking what are the conditions that influence team effectiveness? Some of the things that you're talking about, like member engagement and satisfaction, the degree to which people learn as a consequence of being members of the team, the ability of the team to become a greater performing unit over time, that's in our outcome criteria of team effectiveness. Some of the other things that you were asking about would go more in what I call processes. They're in the middle, and they're emergent properties of how well a team is designed. In my opinion, relationships among team members is a valued good in and of itself, right? That's actually something that we want to promote in the workplace and in our lives in general, because those are things that are valued. What we don't see in the research is that improving the relationships among members and having us feel better about each other has any consequences for team performance effectiveness. So it's not in the causal chain in that way.
Okay. So you want to keep rolling along a little bit? We can grab a few more questions and, hold those towards the end, but I'll keep
Glad
scanning the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Krister. I appreciate your help doing that, because it's hard to monitor the chat at the same time. So what I just want to talk a little bit about is the Team Diagnostic survey itself, how it brings to life the framework that we have just been talking about, and how it can help those of us who actually seek to help teams to achieve really great things. How does the Team Diagnostic survey actually help do that? Simple description, as with most assessments, the Team Diagnostic survey is a survey. Team members, all the members of a team, are invited to complete a questionnaire that asks them a set of descriptive questions that are then combined across team members and within scales in order to produce a picture of the team as a whole. And what I want to start by showing you is really this is basically just, a segment of page 1 of the report, and this is the assessment of a team at a glance. And the far left of the graph, you can see the top triangle that represents the 3 essentials: real team, compelling purpose, right people, and the bottom triangle that represents sound structure, supportive context, team coaching. In this particular one, for the sake of simplicity, I haven't actually included the numerical scores, but what this Team Diagnostic survey will do is allow you to see the degree to which these 6 conditions are in place for any kind of task performing teams, which ones are in relatively good shape, which ones are in relatively poor shape, and therefore what are some points of leverage or points of intervention that will help guide you in intervening to help the effectiveness of the team. So just to explain what you're looking at here, this is classic stoplight coloring. So where you see red, something is relatively in trouble. Where you see yellow, it's moderately well designed. Where you see green, it's in relatively good shape. The shapes of the triangles are also meant as a visual representation of the quality of the team's design. So if you look at the enablers, for example, that shaded triangle is pretty far away from the ideal triangle in the outline around it, which tells you that this particular team is suffering, especially around supportive context, has some problems in sound structure and team coaching as well. I realize I'm showing you an instance of a team that's actually got a fair number of challenges to its design, and where I personally would start as a practitioner is wanting to dig in around the essentials, since those come first. That's the leftmost part of the assessment. The middle there is what we refer to as the key task processes. In Richard's and mine, others' research, we found that there are 3 task-related processes which in the short run are the greatest process predictors of how well a team will perform in the long run and grow as a performing unit over time, which is what we mean by quality of group process and what impact the team is having on its members. Those key task processes in the middle are effort, how hard are team members working to build commitment, shared commitment to the team and its work. Strategy, how appropriate are the choices that members are making about the way they go about doing their work. And third, knowledge and skill, how well are members actually using the full complement of their capabilities in accomplishing the work. This is just a picture of the of the overview of what you would see about a team using the Team Diagnostic Survey. As I've mentioned, I would be awfully curious about additional detail on this team in terms of how they're doing around the essentials in particular. Every one of the 6 conditions is broken down into its subcomponents within the Team Diagnostic Survey report. So there's a great deal more information within its pages about potential points of intervention for this team. What I see when I look at this team here in its overall real team score, which is 3.39, it's close to the middle of the scale. This team is not really a real team. They are interdependent. They need to work together for the common purpose, hence the green shading, a score of 4.08 out of 5, but they're underbounded, meaning it's not really clear to members who is and who is not a member of the team. And the size of the bar tells you there's a great deal of disagreement about this. Some people said it's a team in name only. Some people said we really are highly bounded. And then finally, it's unstable. There's a lot of shifting in the membership of the team. Team Diagnostic Survey, providing you with an overall assessment of the degree to which the 6 conditions are in place overall, and then breaks down into each of the 6 conditions, the details around real team, around compelling purpose. I'll show you one of those in just a moment. And allows you to begin thinking about what are the obstacles to the team's effectiveness that might actually provide some kind of guideposts to how to intervene effectively in the team. Just a few words about what's new in the new TDS that we are releasing as of today. Some of you may be aware that this rigorously researched instrument has been tested already in hundreds of teams. Some years ago, we published it in a peer-reviewed journal and showed its predictive validity and its construct validity and the like. We have since then revised and tested even more powerful scales. We have collected the data on thousands more teams. What you are seeing in the new graphical report has been thoroughly redesigned from the version that was only available to scholars and practitioners before. There's also a lot of supplemental, what I'm calling color material in the Team Diagnostic Survey that takes you down into some great descriptive detail about the team, the context in which it operates, the 6 conditions themselves. For example, there's detail from the team members themselves about what they view as the team purposes, so that you can have their actual explicit descriptions and really see qualitatively the range of difference in how they understand what their team purposes are. Same thing around team metrics. There are measures in this instrument of team learning and team psychological safety. There's data about what is the focus of the team leader's activities, if there is a team lead, if there is a leader of the team, and many more things as well. Krista, I think I want to pause at this point before going into illustrations of how to use TDS, just to see if there are particular questions that have come up.
Your timing is perfect. You just intuit exactly where I'm just about to jump in. So making my life easy here. So we got some great questions in the chat window, and maybe we can just throw a couple of these out. We'll start with Andrea says, how do you know the right people are in place? How can a survey get to that level of knowing?
Yeah, the overall assessments that we're doing of whether the right people are in place in the Team Diagnostic Survey really are around members' observations of whether the team has all of the skills and capabilities that it needs to do the work effectively, and secondly, the degree to which they have teamwork skills to work together collaboratively. So it's at a level of abstraction in the survey. I find it helpful to explore the meaning of that with the team members themselves. And there is opportunity for team members to comment on what they feel they have great strengths in and what it is that they feel they are missing.
Great. All right, let's see what else we have. We have a handful of other questions in here. Are the key task processes leading or lagging indicators of health in the team?
I think I would need a definition of health to answer that. I see them as leading indicators of effectiveness. So in the short and medium term, you can see what is happening to the levels of effort, how well members are using their knowledge and skill, whether they are coordinating well and choosing good strategies. Those are the key task processes. You can see those much faster and much more in the short run than you will see those outcome criteria of team effectiveness. So they'll predict for you whether the team's going to perform well. They will predict for you whether in the long run the team is going to be building its capacity and getting better and better as a performing unit over time. I think that might be what you meant by the health of the team, that we may be using effectiveness and health in similar ways.
We have time for a couple more. So we've got Colin asking whether the TDS allows feedback from stakeholders to get a systemic view.
We don't. We actually do. We don't. The survey itself only goes to team members and the team leader, assuming that there is a team leader. I frequently do that in my own practice, which is to get some additional material from stakeholders and from team members themselves. I frequently do interviews. However, one of the things that we do in the team metrics is we ask team members from the perspective of their main constituencies, their clients, whoever it is that they serve, what are the metrics that most matter to their performance in the eyes of their clients, and how well they are doing on those dimensions. Mm-hmm. So you're not getting a purely objective perspective on that, but you are getting the team members' knowledge and consideration about what their constituents think of them.
Ruth, I'm wondering if it's maybe worth echoing how team effectiveness is measured, that there's 3 criteria of team effectiveness. I don't know if you've touched on that, or I guess you did maybe a little bit earlier, but.
I'm not sure that I named all 3 at once. In all of the research that we've done on team effectiveness, we have been looking at teams that simultaneously do superbly on 3 dimensions. I don't really mean simultaneously because there are trade-offs among them in the short run, but there are 3 criteria. One is how well are they performing their work? So who are the main constituencies, clients the team serves? What do they want from the team? And is the team actually providing that? That's criterion number 1. Criterion number 2 is we never considered a team to be effective if they could only do that once and they burn themselves out in the process. It also has to be a team in which the team is growing in capacity over time. So they are able to solve more problems, do things smarter, faster, better as a consequence of working together as a team. And then the third criterion is what we're summarizing it as member satisfaction. It really is the impact of the team on the members themselves. So a team is only effective to the degree that the impact of the team on the members is positive. They're learning, they're growing, they're developing, as opposed to being undermined, alienated, descaled, demotivated as a consequence of the work.
I think I'll just drop one more in here, Ruth, before we move on, and then we can handle some more at the end, is there a base of normalized values for each dimension in the percentiles? That way you could achieve a benchmark against a global set of teams.
We have not chosen to do that in this report. And I know that teams often want benchmarks against how everybody else is doing, and they particularly want benchmarks around teams like them. What we have found in our research is that the absolute score on the scale of 1 to 5 is highly predictive of effectiveness. It is not the score relative to other teams like you or other teams of a similar type or variation from the norms. And so we don't report it as variation from a norm. I'll just give you a practical illustration of this. I work with a lot of leadership teams. I've studied a lot of leadership teams. And if a leadership team were to get feedback on the overall quality of its purpose relative to other kinds of leadership teams, most leadership teams would say, I'm around the norm, which is to say our purpose is not clear at all. And being around the norm is really not adequate for actually being an effective team. So we've made a choice to report the data against criterion rather than against norms.
I'll drop another couple more in here. I think we have time. So we have Paul Thornton. These are great questions, by the way. Keep them coming. So Paul says, any substantial differences noted between the results when implemented with remote teams as opposed to in-person teams? So I guess virtual teams there is what's being referred to.
Well, we know that virtual teams have a lot of pretty significant challenges to their designs, frequently around compelling purposes, around norms of conduct, and around the interdependence in the task itself. So we see stuff around purpose and structure in particular that remote teams really suffer from. I think the implications for getting the launch of a virtual team right and concentrating on those things in particular is especially clear. There are, of course, challenges to working with a virtual team if in fact you are working in a distributed way yourself, if you're operating as a consultant or a coach to a team that doesn't convene. We can talk about that as we delve together into actually coaching teams using the TDS.
I see Barry Hemmings here. Hello, Barry, joining us from Australia as well. Dropped in a question around, can the TDS be used before and after testing of the effectiveness of an intervention with a team?
Yes, and in fact, the illustration that I was going to offer from my recent work, we did exactly that. We did an assessment of using the Team Diagnostics survey of this leadership team when I first began to work with them, and we did it again 6 months later. It really is a great way of helping the team to objectively look at what's getting in its way and what it could shore up or redesign in order to improve it. And it's also a way of sort of tapping again how they're experiencing it and whether those actions have improved the conditions for them.
Awesome. And then there was a question around matrix teams. There was the answer about virtual teams. What about matrix teams?
Certainly can be used with matrix teams. One of the things that I've seen in matrixed organizations is that one of the challenges of using the Team Diagnostic Survey with matrix teams is they're often underbounded. And so just the question of who completes the survey and what team they're commenting on can be an intervention in and of itself.
Cool. So Ruth, we have about 15 minutes left in the webinar, so maybe we can cycle through. We have a little bit more content to cover.
Sure. So I was going to just give a couple of illustrations of using the Team Diagnostic Survey to support improving a team's effectiveness. As I just said a few minutes ago, I was recently working with the leadership team of a not-for-profit enterprise that ironically, its purpose, its mission is to provide training and collaborative leadership to other enterprises. It's actually not that ironic. They take collaborative leadership very seriously, and they asked for help in upping their own game as a leadership team because they were facing a very significant positive inflection in their history as an organization. So there was so much demand for their work that the vision of what they were providing and to whom was widening because they were being opportunistic, but perhaps that was not so intentional, and it was undermining alignment in the organization. Their business model needed re-looking at because they had become overly dependent on one large client that really demanded a lot of their attention and work, but it also made them vulnerable not to have a broad client base. And then finally, they wanted a broader base of clients, but also wanted to be very clear in their strategic focus for the future growth of the organization. And so their view was that they really needed a strong leadership team to provide all of the aligned leadership that this enterprise would need for its future. And so we did a Team Diagnostic Survey assessment with them, supplemented with some interviews with all of the leadership team members and also some of the staff and some of their key clients, went back and shared the findings of these first and foremost with the chief executive. And because the assessment of the 6 conditions for a team has real special implications for the responsibilities of a team leader, assuming that we're talking about a team that has a team leader. Team Diagnostic Survey can be used with any kind of team, but in sharing the findings with a leader-led team, it's helpful to go to the leader first because they're the one that are going to have to consider the particular leadership actions they may need to take in order to improve the effectiveness of the team. Using the Team Diagnostic Survey, we found some pretty critical team design challenges among those conditions. Purpose clarity was quite low. The team members viewed themselves as missing some pretty critical skills from the leadership team for their future, and a lot of the work that they were doing as a leadership team was not obviously a real team task that required them to work together interdependently in order to be effective. So just to illustrate what we could see from the Team Diagnostic Survey, this was a team that experienced its purpose as moderately compelling, but that's because what they do is really, really important. See the consequentiality score. It's challenging. It's a stretch of their capabilities. Notice the score on challenging. And to quote one leader that I worked with, if only we knew what it was, indicating a sort of common challenge for leadership teams. So the question of what they needed to be doing as a leadership team collectively over and above their individual leadership jobs was a significant challenge to their effectiveness. I will just quickly summarize one of the other insights that came out of our work in using the Team Diagnostic Survey with them, is that leadership teams can operate in 4 different modes or be of 4 different kinds. From least interdependent, where all they're doing is sharing information and providing updates about what's going on in their individual responsibilities, all the way up to the most interdependent, which is collectively making decisions on behalf of the enterprise. And that's where they were spending the bulk of their time, was in mere information sharing, which was not a place that they could have the most impact on the enterprise as a whole. So just in summary, in working with this not-for-profit leadership team, the intervention from that point was really to act on the 6 conditions: to clarify the team purposes, to work on developing a set of key decisions so that they were acting as a real team, bringing in new members so the right people were around the table and they had the composition that they needed in order to be effective, and then creating real team tasks and providing some structure in the way that they work together so that their work and their agendas when they did convene as a team was focused on real leadership teamwork. So in essence, the Team Diagnostic Survey provided guideposts for really major points of intervention to improve the effectiveness of this leadership team. I do not want, I mean, it really made a profound difference to their effectiveness as a team and to the future of their organization. I don't want to make this sound simplistic or formulaic, because doing things like clarifying the purpose of a leadership team and creating real strategic work is serious conceptual work, both for the leader and for consultants and coaches who support them and for the team as a whole. But having the Team Diagnostic Survey really did serve as a set of guideposts about what is getting in the way and what are the kinds of things that you could actually do about it. The last thing I want to say about using the Team Diagnostic Survey is that I think one of the things that I find most exciting about this framework is how powerful it is in helping think about and act effectively in dealing with the modern challenges of teams and teaming. So briefly, a lot of the questions that arise these days are about how well do we do collaboration as an enterprise? Can we be counted on to get the really critical teams right, designed right, and effective that we most need in order to execute on our strategy and accomplish our vision? And the Team Diagnostic Survey can be used both to assess those critical teams, but also to look across teams and to generate enterprise level themes about what it is that we are doing well and how do we get in our own way around doing collaboration and teams effectively as an enterprise. Secondly, I think some of the most important teams that are being formed these days are what I'll call ecosystem teams. These are teams that come together across organizations to solve really complex societal problems that really cannot be handled by one institution or one organization alone. I happen to work with a lot of them that are trying to transform health and healthcare in the United States, but this framework about the 6 conditions is every bit as valid and powerful in helping to support and enable the work of those teams as well. We had a question earlier from one of you about the basic conditions and the degree to which those things are relevant or in place for teams that really need to continually do fast team startups where teams self-form, reconfigure, dissolve, form in other ways, and where real agility and teamwork is necessary. And I think having those 6 conditions at your fingertips and building the capacity of all organization members to think and operate in those terms has turned out to be pretty critical for answering the question of how is it possible for organizations to do this work well. Christopher, I just am mindful of the time, and I want to be sure that I have a chance to turn it over to you as well to talk about what opportunities we're creating for people to learn more, to explore, to use the Team Diagnostic survey. But I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Yeah. Why don't we drop that out, and then we can just save a little bit of time at the end, and people can stay on a little longer if they want. But we have about 7 minutes out. But you want to advance the slides a bit?
Sure, you bet.
So we wanted to share a couple of things. So, and Ruth, maybe you want to tee this up a little bit that, historically the instrument has been mainly being used in research settings. And while it's been available to, generate a lot of great knowledge, and I think there's a lot of great free knowledge out there in terms of the articles and books and all that, it is starting to become available now commercially. So you want to talk a little bit about that history?
Yes,
and I can
sure. We originally designed it on the basis of instruments that we have created for research purposes because we wanted to understand and influence team effectiveness. As you know, Richard and I and Trex and Erin and all of our colleagues who have developed it care passionately about making a difference to people's ability to accomplish great things together. And we've always known that this was a powerful way of helping people to develop the knowledge of this framework and how to use it. To this point, it has been largely available to people who already know the framework very deeply because they are researchers who study teams, or because they are professors and teachers who have been teaching about teams and leadership in their classrooms. And we've made it widely available in a slightly more primitive form in its documentation, in any case, to anybody who wants to use it for scholarly and teaching purposes. What we are launching here today is the opportunity for anybody to learn very deeply about the underpinnings of the framework itself and the instrument and how it works and what it measures and how it can be used. That has just never been available before. It's something you had to pick up in a classroom in your doctoral program. And so the certification courses that we're offering here are that, fundamental training in the framework and the instrument itself and how it could be useful in supporting the work of people who work with teams.
Yeah. So we have been working behind the scenes as a team of us, Ruth and Pauline and a developer, Andy Evans, who's also, I think, joining us today as well. And we've pulled together a couple of great certification options. So one of them you can do from wherever you want, anytime. That's option 1. It's online. We call this a level 1 foundational practitioner certification. I think this is a really great offer for folks. This includes 6 video-based modules. So it's a video-based course. You get a TDS starter assessment as part of that. And we're really excited about developing a community of practice. So we're going to be having group supervision and coaching calls. We're going to be sourcing cases from the practitioner community around using the TDS with real teams. So I think that's going to be really exciting. We have a members-only LinkedIn group, and we're going to be running people through these in cohorts. So a couple times a year, we'll be having launches and running that through. So you can check that out. We've created this, it's called the Team Diagnostics Learning Lab. And so you can go over there and check this out. But these are video-based courses. So there's like more than 50 videos that really delve into the Team Diagnostic survey framework, all these elements, and really digging into how do you actually start using this. And a lot of this is the cognitive knowledge part, all the sort of the basic information you need. But we've tried to make it interactive. We use real examples in there. We have some exercises and activities. But this is really designed to be, if you're up and running with teams, you want to get using this quickly, this is a great way to go and have this at your fingertips, and to use it also as a resource guide. So it's both a course, but something that you can come back to over time. We're going to continue adding in great content in there, but there's a lot of great stuff in there in terms of videos, downloads, podcasts, books, articles, all kinds of stuff you would ever want to know about the Team Diagnostic Survey and the 6 conditions. We've also, and we can move on to the next one slide, we are going to be running some classroom-based certifications around. One of the great things about classroom-based certification is you're going to get both the foundational level online course as part of the package, but you also get a 2-day class where we get more hands-on. And this is a chance to really kind of get the TDS in your bones and start using it through simulation. So we're going to bring out real case examples and practice how to interpret reports, how to pitch them to teams, how to start getting into some team coaching. So, and these are going to be modular. So if you decide to do an online course and later you want to go to the classroom training, we're going to prorate the course price if you go to a classroom-based training. So you can check that out. We put some special discounts in here for both the online course as well as the classroom training. We have an upcoming workshop in Boston on October 5 and 6, and we are working on dates right now in Australia. Pauline Willis, who's on this call today, is going to be the contact for that one, and we're looking at a UK workshop in early December, so dates to be decided shortly. Ruth's going to be co-facilitating the October workshop along with myself, and then with Pauline in Australia in October. Not sure yet at this point. I don't think you're on deck for the UK one at this point, right, Ruth?
Not to my knowledge, but I could be.
Yeah. So if you want to get in on one of the ones with Ruth, that's, those are the opportunities coming up this fall. We'll have some more dates in 2018. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of great value between the course, the quarterly group coaching calls, the online, the online group and a starter assessment and more. So encourage you to check that out. We'd love to have you join the community, and we'd love to see you there. So I think with that, Ruth, we are getting down towards the end here. I'll drop in some links into the chat window here briefly if you want to go and check out some websites. We got a lot of great downloadable stuff. And we actually have the last slide, I think, with some resources, right? So if people want to do some reading, books, etc., there's a lot of great stuff out there. We've been dropping out different types of content that you can check out. So we're going to make this webinar recording available. I'll have that up probably later this evening, or if not tomorrow, at the teamcoachingzone.com/webinars site. If you registered for the webinar, you'll get a link emailed to you. So we'll follow up with an email to you so you can have this webinar available. But Ruth, why don't we take a few final questions, and then we can say, if people want to linger around and have some more chit chat, we can do that. So just maybe formally, we'll thank you all for joining today's session. And, like you, we're really committed and passionate about building great teams out there. And we think the Team Diagnostics Survey framework is really sort of a valuable instrument to have and a framework for supporting your great teaming efforts. So let's see what else we have here in terms of questions. I know Dorja earlier from Serbia popped in, and he asked a question around how do you pick which teams should use the TDS, paraphrasing his question there.
Krista, I'd be happy to hear your perspective on this too, since you do in fact do a lot of work with teams. I do work at the enterprise level, where the questions that we ask with the leadership team are, what are the handful of teams that are really essential to you to deliver on your strategy? And it may include frontline teams that are most in touch with clients and most outward facing and most able to detect what's going on in the world. It almost inevitably involves a senior leadership team, could be the senior operations team. But that's typically the question that I begin with, which is, what is your purpose, vision, and mission as an organization, and what are the critical things that have to be delivered in order to accomplish that purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different types of teaming situations, so I think it's going to really vary case by case. I like Ruth, I do a lot of work with leadership teams, and what I think oftentimes I've found with leadership teams is many of them are just by default teams because the organizational hierarchy kind of has asked them to be so. But when you really get into why are they a team? Are they a real team? Oftentimes they're a little bit of deer in the headlights. They don't really have good answers for that. And that's just a great place to start. And so, that's been a lot of the place that I've been working with the TDS is with leadership teams, but I think it's going to probably vary, team by team. I know we probably didn't do that justice, but just to get some other ones in here, we've got, is your team coaching effort, are you doing real-time interventions or moves based on the TDS in the client team meetings? And I would say personally, yes. And I think, if we go back to what Ruth was saying around the 60-30-10 rule, I think the TDS is really useful in the design upfront work. You can do feedback and coaching sessions during a launch retreat, if that's a half day or day or whatever you've got. But that I think in the ongoing work of the team, it's a resource you can keep coming back to. So I think it's sort of, coaching is additive to that, that really good coaching is another skill set you bring that, can really help illuminate team diagnostic information to make all kinds of interventions with a team. So that's how I would respond to that. I don't know what you would add, Ruth.
No, I wholly concur. I mean, typically my practice is to do something fairly intensive around rebuilding the essentials in particular. And then there's a lot of coaching that can be done around other aspects of the 6 conditions in the ongoing work of the team by being present and able to intervene. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's see what else we've got in here.
I noticed a question, I think it was from Andrea, about whether the team diagnostic survey is sort of set in stone or whether we're open to feedback from the community of users. We absolutely intend this to be a living thing that improves over the course of its life, and so the answer is we fully expect to innovate and improve it on the basis of input from those who use it. I had also seen a question about the availability of the online certification course.
Yeah.
Our intention is to make that continually available, but we will be starting people into, in essence, in cohorts. It's one of our aspirations to build a community of practice around intervening in teams. And so being able for us as course instructors to provide coaching, feedback, supervision, interaction throughout the course of the online work, we're going to be doing it in cohorts. But if you're missing the one that's launching right now, there's plenty of opportunity toward the end of the year, beginning of next year to become part of the next cohorts.
Cool. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else in here. I know we may have missed, if we didn't get to your question, we apologize for that. And now's a chance to stick it back in the chat window if you want. While we're lingering around here, let's see.
There's a question from Barry Hemmings about being the use with university student teams, and there has, of course, been quite a lot of use. Ruth, if you'd like to have to cover that aspect.
Yeah. Yes, we have any number of professor colleagues who actually pretty regularly use it, especially in Teams courses. I used to do it myself in teaching about teams. I had student teams who were doing projects that really were about providing consultation and support to other teams, and so they were using this as a means of assessment. It is certainly available for educational uses, and I think all of us have a lot of aspiration for really getting this basic framework in how to collaborate brilliantly spread as wide as possible. I personally would love to see it in schools. So.
I got one private message that's a really good question around, curious about the development of collective leadership for a team. Can the TDS be used to develop a benchmark for the team's potential to act and lead collectively rather than through the classical hierarchical way? I think my answer to that would be absolutely. And I think your book, Ruth, on senior leadership teams really gets into that, but I don't know, you probably have some perspective on that.
I think it has to be an aspiration of the team to do that. But yes, absolutely. I think, I think that actually gets built into the fundamental purposes of the team. And, I've worked with, I'm thinking back to the leadership team I was talking about as an illustration earlier. Collaborative leadership was part of what they taught and what their interventions were. And they had a pretty deep-seated focus on it themselves. And as a consequence, the work that they did together around clarifying purposes and changing membership was not done hierarchically. That was actually something that they did in collaboration by choice. So I think there is a pretty important role of the chief executive, the senior leader, in the degree to which there is an aspiration for collective leadership to occur, but it absolutely is useful in developing that, if so.
There was a question from Andrea around, will you improve the TDS over time with feedback from the community of users, or is it static now? And I think the answer is we actually just did a round of upgrades before this launch, redid the report, retooled some stuff. We added some open-ended qualitative questions at the end, so you can ask those. And so, yeah, our intention is to continue to iterate with this over time and periodically, as we dive in more and we get a bigger community going, is to really get the feedback from the community and see what do people need and how do we augment and continue building on that. So yeah, I think lots of good things to come. We'll just say here, we've envisioned a level 3 master practitioner certification once we have enough people who have gone through either the online course or the classroom-based training to start to do some more advanced work with the community. So that's coming down the pipeline too. But we really are sort of just at the launch now of really trying to build out a robust community of practitioners using the instrument. Okay, let's see if there's anything else that popped in here.
This might be a good time to mention as well that we also offer various forms of supervision for people using the Team Diagnostics survey to cover all levels and capabilities. So depending on what you're doing, we can actually support you in various ways.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying for a lot of folks out there who are working with teams, is having somebody to speak with, especially when you're dealing with complex teams or the dynamics around them, can be super helpful. So supervision, definitely, and especially for folks new to working with teams, I think is indispensable around supervision. So that's something that all of us are doing, Ruth and Pauline and I. Okay, let's see if there's anything else here. I'm just scanning the chat box. So Rob Costello asked an interesting question here. I think he asked this twice, and I wasn't sure if I read it. But Bob, you said, from all the data you've collected, have you developed common ANET patterns? I don't know if you mean anti-patterns around teams. So if you want to come on, I don't know if that's clear to you, Ruth, go ahead and field that. But I don't know, Bob, if you want to come on, unmute and come on and explain that or share a bit more.
So it's actually, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so it's actually 2 parts. So the anti-pattern question is, and I put a second question in there, is a bigger question, right? Which is, can you segment the data by client? So the first question is, have you done any work around looking at common anti-patterns with all the data that you have that are common across all teams? Then the second question is, could you segment the data by client and look across the results of all the teams in the client as a tool to reflect on the culture of the organization in their journey to become a team-based culture?
So in the latter question, it's actually less segmenting. So the way the Team Diagnostic survey works is that the assessment is done at the level of a team. So you would be doing the TDS multiple times for many different teams in an organization. And yes, you can look at patterns across the data that come from many teams within an organization to see if there are enterprise level strengths and weaknesses. With respect to the first question, what do you mean by an anti-pattern?
So what I mean is there common behavior, based on all the data you've collected, are there common behaviors or issues across teams that you've seen that say, so in all the data we have, one thing that really shows up is, this may be redundant, right? That they don't have goals. Like there's not a good goal development, or they don't have clear boundaries. That seems to be a problem across all our data. Teams are confused about team boundaries, or teams don't feel like they are in part of a bigger social context within the organization.
The 6 conditions framework arose out of seeing what the typical obstacles were that teams were facing to being effective, as well as the answering positive condition that you could put in place to address that. So in essence, the 6 conditions framework is the summary of both the positive and the negative patterns that we've seen across all of the thousands of teams that we have studied over the years. With respect to which conditions are particularly problematic for teams, that can vary a lot from organization to organization, from team type to team type. So because I've concentrated a lot of my attention on teams whose purpose is leadership, I'm particularly familiar with the common dysfunctions of what you typically see in leadership teams. But in answer to your question about patterns, that's precisely where the 6 conditions framework comes from.
That's what I figured. So I thought it might have been a redundant question. Thanks.
I mean, just anecdotally, one of the things I found in the TDS, the 6 conditions, is around organizational support or supportive context. And almost universally, every team I work with scores low on that one.
Yeah.
So really, that's sort of one of those trends that I've just seen in the number of the teams that I worked with the TDS. So that one kind of sticks out. And the real
But
team
you
one,
do work with leadership teams a lot. And,
I do.
and that's a pattern I've
That's a
seen.
surprising one. Yeah. And the other one is just the real team thing. I think that's been one of the most valuable constructs for me personally, is just how often we just flippantly use the word team. We throw teams together, so-called teams, and yet, people haven't really just thought about deliberately choosing to be a team or thinking about, do we need to be a team? And I've definitely learned the hard way around, being with teams or coaching teams where they didn't really need to be a team, and they wanted to be a team, but didn't have a real reason or business reason to. And that's usually not enough. And you could save people a lot of trouble by going down a pathway where the team doesn't really need to be a team. There's not a compelling reason to do that. And so anyways, I found that real team thing just cutting across almost every team I'm working with.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good stuff here. So I think we can just go ahead and formally end today's session. We can linger around here if people want to, come off mic and chit chat. We can linger around a little bit. But again, thank you all for joining today's session. We will generate a replay of this video and send that out to everybody who registered on the link. I think we had 175 people signed up before. A lot of folks emailed in saying they couldn't attend the live session and wanted the replay. So we're going to make that available. And again, would love to see you guys in one of the upcoming workshops and join the community of practice. A warm invitation to you guys, and have a great rest of your day.